So with that, I'll
Thank
turn it
you.
over. But
Peter?
thank you so much for being with us.
Mr. President, thank you for the plug for the book, Peter. I had to pay him to do that, but appreciate it. We actually met yesterday and had what I thought was a very good conversation, and fortunately rushed it into print. It's actually in OnEarth.org, published last night. And I thought I'd pretty much stick to a similar track because we had a conversation that I thought flowed quite naturally. And it began with something that you ended up talking a lot about yesterday, which was you kept using the word silly and silliness, and the silliness of diplomacy and the silliness of the normal language of diplomacy. And I said to you that, you know, one thing people say about you is that you don't play by the normal rules. So maybe you can start by talking about what that means a little.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. The UNFCCC process, when we came to know about it, actually did look really silly. The idea of the process was that if two countries agreed on something, and if a third country came along and said they didn't, and they wouldn't agree on that, then the countries that have agreed dilutes their position to accommodate the third country. So by the time, if we get to an agreement, it would be so diluted it won't be worth the paper that it would be written on, because it is always trying to find the lowest common denominator among countries. And it's an endless process. It goes on and on and on. The whole idea of it is not substance, in my mind. It was just simply the process. And when we went to Copenhagen, everyone was talking about the process. And that is apparently the democracy of it all. And Sudan was giving me a lesson and a lecture on democracy. I thought that was quite fantastic. And Bolivia and so many other brilliant countries were giving us lectures on the lack of democracy in the Copenhagen process, and therefore it should not be a part to the UNFCCC process or the UN negotiations for climate change. My understanding and what we were trying to say was it's so difficult to work like that. If we can have two people agreeing on something, let's agree to it. And then if others want to come along and join it, let them come along and join it. If they don't come along, and it's up to the governments or up to the people to try and see how they can get these other governments to align themselves to this. We've seen many successful models as this, the European Union being one. They don't go around asking everyone, how they would like to do it. Germany, Italy, and France just took together and said, this is how we are going to do it. Either you want to come in or you don't come in. And then at the end of the day, we are now finding that everyone has kind of given up and therefore decided to go along with Germany and Italy and France's rules. And it's working. My feeling was that a process would have to run along similar lines. Another striking thing about the UN negotiations were that they were asking countries to give up the good life. They were asking politicians to get their countries to stop producing carbon. In effect, you are asking Indian leaders, Chinese leaders, and other leaders to stop cutting ribbons of power plants. Now, the only way of reaching out to the people, getting a vote out of the people, would be by having projects and cutting ribbons so that people get very impressed by it. So the UN was asking these countries not to have open power plants, not to give electricity to the people. And this was very, very difficult for them to come around to. So one of the ideas that we thought would be better was if we can ask countries to produce renewable energy and to come up with the amount of money they would spend amount of investments they would make in renewable energy, and I believe at the end of the day it would come to the same. If you spend so much money on buying so many solar panels, you know how much electricity you would be producing, and therefore you know how much carbon you would be reducing. I'm glad that after Cancun and in Durban, they've started along this track, and hopefully we will get countries to agree that they will produce so much energy, but renewable energy. And the idea here would be to see how much we can get countries to produce, and therefore not produce all that carbon, and not to be relying so much upon fossil fuel. I feel that fossil fuel and all that diesel is really, really very, very obsolete technology. This was around during the 1800s, and it's not actually producing the things that we now want to produce. The new technology is here, it's viable, it's feasible, it's financially viable, but we've not been able to lay them. I feel simply because there's been so much infrastructure laid during the 1800s and 1900s, and they do not want to switch, they do not want to come out with other forms of technology because all that has already been done. So this is, in a sense, quite strange to countries, I feel, like India and China, who wants to be the leaders of tomorrow. If they want to aspire to become leaders, they must embrace the new technology. We cannot still go on with the Industrial Revolution. There is another industrial revolution that is happening, which is solar panels and all that new technology that is coming out. So we would like to see countries pushing in that direction as well, as much as asking them to reduce carbon. So they can reduce carbon emission by producing renewables. One of the other reasons I thought that we are unable to find an agreement is because of the mistrust among nations, between rich countries and poor countries. You know, everyone is just with the idea that someone else is out there to get you. The bigger developing emitting countries feel that industrial countries have been at it for the last 500 years, and now it's their turn, so why shouldn't they be doing it? Again, I thought this was silly. For 400 years, the industrial world has taken us to the brink, and that doesn't mean that India, China, Brazil, and South Africa can push us from the brink by them exactly doing the same kind of thing. So, and also, they feel that this was a kind of a conspiracy to stop them from developing and overtaking industrial countries. Especially India and China feel, I think, that they are on the threshold of actually overtaking a number of industrial countries in terms of GDP or in terms of per capita and so on. So there's this very big mistrust, a gap that we felt that we had to somehow, we must be able to fill it. I'm afraid that's not going to be easy. The minute anything happens in any country, you are suddenly coming out with so many conspiracies of why that has happened. But in my understanding, it mostly happens because governments are so useless. They just haven't got a clue on how to go about things. Again, you know, I am with an example. I have been just recently overthrown by a coup. They were just, I was about 5 minutes of being mobbed by the military and the police. And instantly the Indian government and the United States government recognized the new order, or the dictatorship coming back. Now, many would argue that this was a conspiracy, but in my mind it's just simply they didn't get it. Some gentleman who came into office the next day, there was a coup in the Maldives. and that's it. Yes, there was a coup in the Maldives. And it doesn't really, they haven't been able to have a good grip on the situation. So governments don't necessarily work so brilliantly. I've been in it. I've been running a government for the last 3.5 years. And I think, therefore, there's always more simpler solutions or reasons why things are not happening. And it's not always so complicated. Most of the time, it's because we are silly. The type of conversations that we have among leaders, the words are so loaded and difficult that you finally end up talking to each other for 1 hour and not saying anything. And you could be talking for hours and not say a thing. It's an excellent trade, and it's a very good knack. But this is how diplomacy works. But we would like to see how we may be able to impress upon the people of these countries, not the governments. Governments and politicians always do what the people want them to do. So in my mind, we have to be going to the people, we have to go to the grassroots and get them active and calling for climate action. Asking President Obama doesn't work. But when climate becomes an election issue, it works. You will be going into the next election, and apparently no one here believes that it can be an election issue. You've just all taken it for granted that the New York Times, the Washington Post, and all this media are actually talking about something they know. You've taken it for granted that they know what they're talking about. And you don't believe that climate change can be an election issue because somehow you feel that gasoline prices are far more important than the planet for the average American. It is important for the average American because you keep on repeating it. If you start repeating saying it's not important, very soon you will find that it is not important. So I think the power of the people, of the masses, are far, far greater than any government or any military. So the bulk of the work that we need doing, I feel, are with the people and trying to tell them that they have to come up with these movements. Politicians always only think up to the next election. But if you think about it, why we do anything is because we want to feed our families. We want to give something good to our kids. We are not doing anything for ourselves. In fact, we come to work because we want to look after a family, because we want to raise a child. And that is for the future. And to assume that this is not true in elections, I find it strange that politicians can only think for today and people will only be interested for today. I think most of the voters will be interested in their children, not themselves. So it is the future, it is tomorrow that we are trying to save. Today is lost, it's gone, it's already noon, and there's not a lot that we can do today. If there is anything that we want to achieve, I believe that we have to be thinking on a much bigger scale, much more sustainable, and to the future. And I really think that kind of manifesto will get votes here. It can get someone elected into office. Even if people keep on telling me I'm talking rubbish, I will keep on talking this rubbish. Because I strongly believe, we came into government not telling people that we are going to give you this, this and that tomorrow. We actually came into government telling people we can't give you anything. There's nothing we can give. And people voted for us. People didn't say no to that. But when we were in government, we were able to give them a lot of things. But so I think, people are people. Either you may be living in the United States, you may be living in the Maldives. But people are people, and they are always worried and interested about their children, and that is their future.
You've answered the first 8 questions I had, so I'm going to break in and throw out the next 6 together. Come back to a couple of things you said. I'm going to leave the climate talks and the expert stuff because there are a lot of people in this room who know that a lot better than I do. But a couple of things about Copenhagen, which is a huge part of the movie. I mean, it's really the climax of the movie is seeing how that worked on the inside. Very unusual movie in that respect because I think the filmmakers got a lot of access people don't normally get. But you alluded to a couple of things. You talked about Brazil,
Has
India,
left the conference.
China, Russia, South Africa, the so-called BRICS group. And there was actually a piece in the New York Times this morning about how difficult it is for a group of 5 countries like that to work together. On the other hand, you had this 40-ish group of states, the Association of Small Island States, which actually managed to work very, very coherently together.
Has joined the conference.
So just to ask you something about those 2 things, and then I would like you to speak just a little bit about India because it's your next door neighbor, it's the giant. You told me yesterday you had a lot of dealings with India, some of them quite promising. But talk about the Association of Small Island States. What is likely to happen to that now, because obviously you were really the de facto leader of that. And then within that, I think you talked very eloquently yesterday about how the Maldives, in a sense, is a special case because it is so beautiful, it is so vulnerable, it's so iconic. So again, if you could maybe talk a little bit about how now that you are still in the Maldives, you're able to play a political role there, you still have this interest in the global situation, and you're right next door to India. Can you talk a little bit about those things?
The small islands, we form about 42 countries, and we've been able to get them together. We call ourselves AOSIS, Association of Small Islands, and we've been trying to come up with a singular narrative for climate change so that we could all adhere to it and then advocate more forcefully with bigger countries. By and large, we've been successful in many instances, but of course we are seeking 1.5 degrees and 350 parts per million, and we're not getting it. Copenhagen, we were hoping for it, but the question was, what would happen to them? We must find some other country who can articulate and say a lot more about climate coming out from small countries, because the smaller countries, or rather island nations, are in the forefront of it. We are the frontline states, and we are very, very vulnerable to any change in the balance, in the natural balance of things. I will work. I hope I still have some friends in these countries, and then perhaps we may be able to get someone articulating along the lines that we were talking about. I can't tell you which country that would be, but I think it has to be a very tender country. It has to be a fragile country. It has to be precarious, and it has to have some romance to it. And it has to be able to capture the imagination of as many people as possible. So the island president is not my story. It's not just simply only the story of the Maldives. It's the story of the islands. And it is the same everywhere, wherever, whatever island it may be. So I think we need to quickly find, before we go to Rio, before the conference happens there. The Cartagena group again was, we started the group, and we've been trying to get more countries joining it. We've also started a carbon neutral group of countries, and we've got more countries joining it. So we need to get this work going, and we need to find countries who are able to deal with it, and countries who are able to do exactly the same kind of things that we were doing. To do that, the country has to be able to claim a moral high ground. That, you don't go on murdering people, You don't go on abusing fundamental rights of your own citizens. You don't go on cancelling elections. You have to find a fairly decent kind of a ruler, which is very rare. But you have to find someone who can come out and say these things. So I think, with your help, with everyone's help, this is really important right now. I feel that we are losing the momentum that we gained if we are not able to advocate along these lines. I also feel that the present democracy movements must understand that democracy rests on two things. One is caring about the people, which is human rights, and also looking after the planet. Democracy can only be built upon these foundations. And I think the Arab countries that are now coming out, and any country that is moving towards pluralistic democracy, we must be able to get them to adhere to these climate principles as well as human rights principles. I think they would very easily reach out to you because they want friends, they want people to talk about their democracy, they want people to increase capacity in their consolidation of democracy, or they might want to kind of do more democratic work, and therefore they're more likely to reach out to you. And before they come out strong, before they settle down, if we can get them, get the climate issues entrenched into their policies, that would make sure that even when they are democratic, even when they start ruling, that the climate works go hand in hand with human rights and democracy. I think these two things needs doing now. A, we need to find a leader for AOSIS, and B, we need to tell democracy movements that it's not just human rights, it is also the planet.
I'm going to run out of time, and I'm sure Matt's going to holler at me in a minute to stop because we want to throw it open for more questions. But really, the third set of questions I had, a lot of us are communicators. You're obviously a communicator, and I think a politician, in a sense, has to be a communicator. But we struggle a lot, all of us, in this environmental world with how do you communicate these messages about climate. I want to just throw out two quotes and a comment that struck me when I was thinking about this. One was a review that appeared actually in one of the Hollywood Online blogs, which said that the movie, and I want to talk more about the movie per se later when we have questions, but they said it plays more like a thriller and less like a doomsday warning, which triggered a thought that we talk a lot about. How on earth do you avoid, the downer, the apocalypse, which we know demobilizes people as much as it inspires them. And then I wondered if you could square that with a couple of other things. One is, you said to me yesterday, talking about dealing with big powers like China and India and the US, that no matter how silly the language of diplomacy is, quote, we have to find narratives that don't irritate them. It's a very delicate balance there of one kind of language versus another. And then a skeptic's argument. I noticed in a lot of the more mainstream coverage of your administration, your removal in the coup, people come back constantly to what was a brilliant communications device, which was your underwater cabinet meeting, which probably most people have heard about. And the word stunt was always used. And stunt's a funny word because it's a clever thing. It's a publicity thing that gains attention. It's also something where I think a lot of the commentators I read said, well, put him in a box, he's a stunt man. It's how do you just think generally about that world of how we communicate messages?
Well, it's not always easy to sell bad news. And what we are trying to tell governments to reduce development. So it's always difficult to sell that to the Indians and the Chinese and the Brazilians and developing countries. So instead, I think, I've talked about it, instead trying to say how much renewable energy will you be producing tomorrow? During the SARC summit, as it happens, I was the chair for the SARC this year, but I'm of course no longer. But all SARC countries were able to agree that they will spend 2% of their national income on renewable energy. And now, if you do the sums backwards, you will again be able to come out with how much carbon emission we are talking about, what kind of a cap we are talking about. If you are able to do this exactly the same maths, you will be able to say when these countries therefore will peak, when they would start reducing. So it's all the issues that we were trying to find from the UNFCCC process can be done through good news. Instead of asking to give up life, you still maintain the good life. I think in messaging, in communication, it's always better to give a more a happier picture than a doomsday scenario. John has done it excellently in The Island President. You know, he's taken it as a thriller and moving it all the way up to Copenhagen and of course fading it. But it ran so that it was a positive story. So I think a positive story is important. And I also think that we can't, I mean, it's very difficult to ask Indians and the Chinese to stop producing energy or stop emitting carbon and opening up power plants. So I would always say that we have to talk about what can be done, not talking about what should not be done.
Are we running tight? Do we want to open this up
No,
more
we'll
into the rest
start
of
with
this
the other
large group?
offices.
Yeah.
And
Why don't we, thank you very much. These are wonderful
you.
words, and I was lucky to look at the trailer to the movie, and which I mentioned earlier, which is wonderful. I'm gonna first ask a quick question, then we'll go to the other question, to the other offices. And it really follows up on your last thought, which is communicating the urgency of climate change. What we often hear is people are concerned about their jobs today. How are they going to feed their family this week? And therefore, when scientists talk about what will happen in 2050 or 2100, it seems very, very long away. And it doesn't seem like a very urgent problem. Now, you've had, because of the islands, it's more urgent for you, perhaps, than somebody who lives in the middle of the United States. But how do you balance that? Because often, to get the sense of urgency, we talk about bad news. If you don't do this, something bad will happen. Mm-hmm. So how do you talk the good news story plus the urgency?
Why have we not talked about the economic argument for renewables? I mean, fossil fuel is expensive. It's expensive for everyone. What is only expensive in renewables are the capital expenditure. So I think there is an economic rationale for renewable energy. And you can be talking about the new boom, the stimulus green package. You could be talking about the green jobs. You can be talking about the change that is required for these economies so that they maintain the same speed, that they maintain the same level of growth. As we see it now, it's always a recession, one after the other. I think that's a symptom of obsoleteness of the existing economic order or existing economic systems. And therefore, we must be looking into other economic models, a low carbon development strategy. And I think we can find that. And I believe that if more people start working on how economically more viable it is to have renewable energy than having fossil fuel, it works. It certainly is much, much more economical in the Maldives to have renewable energy than to have fossil fuel. So I would balance that by talking about the economics of it. Climate change is not just an environment, earth science. It's not only an earth science issue, it's an economic issue, it's a human rights issue. So it's the earth science issue that gives you the very long-term, unending idea. But if you go into the economic argument of it or the human rights argument of it, it's not so long-term, and you can be talking about the benefits of it, I think.
Thank you. Which office should we go to first?
Do we have any questions in San Francisco?
We can't hear you if you do.
Yeah, we don't.
Okay.
Okay.
If any of the offices have any questions, just raise your hand.
Well, while we're watching, I'm going to
Okay.
ask another question, since I can't see any hands yet. And then we'll have here. A question is, there's a movie, I think it was called Sun Rising, about another island nation looking
Sun Come
at
Up.
Sun Come Up, about looking at where they might move as they get displaced from their homeland. What have you done if, as the sea level rises, you have to move your 300,000 people? What would you do? Where would you go? And how do you begin the process of looking for a new home?
Well, we started by thinking that we have to have a bottom line, safety. So therefore, some land elsewhere. But we felt later on that, this is not working. I go to the islands and I ask islanders that, would you move? One lady told me, one grandmother told me, President, we can go if you want to, but where would the colors go, where would the butterflies go, and where would the sounds go? So, of course you can't take the sounds. You can't take the colors, it would be different. So you can't relocate a civilization, a tradition, a culture. And it's going to be so difficult to get these people moving at all. Leaders might think that they would like to move these people, and sometimes industrial countries kind of have this conception that everyone wants to come to them, which is not true. The vast majority of the people of this planet do not want to move. They have their ancestors, they have their history, they have their tradition, and they want to remain where they are. So they would probably go into collective suicide and remain there. But of course, there'll be a number of people who can pack up and sometimes go. And that's going to be a lot of people, a fair amount of people, and all that environment refugee issues would be such a threat to the international world order and safety and peace. So we will, I think, soon start seeing that happening. Both happening. The idea of going towards collective suicide, and also those who want to move to start moving. And then we tried with a sovereign fund. This was just a fund to save for a rainy day, in a sense, so that if shove comes to push, we might have to do something about it. But I think if we go, for instance, for a referendum and ask people, what do you want to do? They would come out and say, you're mad. We're going to stick here. And people are refusing to move from one island to another, which is just the next door island. We have 16 islands where we need relocation because of coastal erosion. And I've tried for 2 years to get them to move to other countries. And they're not doing it, and they're not listening to me, they don't want to listen to me, they don't like the arguments, and somehow they'll find something very silly to say, and I would think that this was a silly thing to say. But no, people want to remain. So that means we must be thinking about adaptation. and more softer adaptation measures. The technology, the adaptation technology that we have is again very obsolete. The water breakers that we are building in the Maldives, for instance, were built in the 1800s again. When I was flying over New York, coming here, the whole of the western coast or eastern coast has water breakers and embankments. That was done during the 1800s. And it's done and finished. Now we have to do it, and it's expensive. Each island in the Maldives will cost about $4 million for an embankment, and another $3 million for a water system. And so we need to find how that money can come about. And again, I don't think anyone has this money. Your governments don't have this money, not to the extent that we need. What is required is so huge. So, I would forget about asking richer countries because no one can actually give it. So we must find revenue streams within ourselves, within our economies, so that we will be able to come up with these adaptation programs. Now, to do that, you need democracy. To spend intelligently and to be able to actually give things to the people, you must have a governance system that listens to the people and not just the guns and the military and the police. So we are able to give the money for the adaptation program. Before we came into government, the president was spending 800 million rupees a year. And after we came in, we were able to reduce that to 37 million, from 800 to 37. So we had some money for the adaptation programs. And actually, surprisingly, no one, after Copenhagen and all that, no one has actually given us anything for the adaptation program. The World Bank has done nothing. And they've been talking and talking and talking about it, and finally we've got so bored out of it, we've stopped asking them. And so we must have democracy on these vulnerable countries so that they can come up with the proper policies, that they find the proper revenue streams. So because the wrong has already happened and the countries will be challenged, what we need to do quickly is adaptation and find new technology for adaptation. And softer adaptation measures, biological adaptation measures. For instance, growing a reef. It's possible to grow a reef, and if you can grow a reef, you save your island. So I would instead of trying to relocate ourselves, we would have to brace ourselves.
I think so many of us always thought of the Maldives as some sort of island paradise, but you mentioned in the beginning that you spent 18 months on a prison island, and I was wondering if you could describe how you spent those 18 months and what the Maldives was like for most of your life.
Bored out of my mind. I usually don't talk about it. I try to make it as happy as possible. It's not nice. You will see the cell where I spent 18 months, and then it's not nice. It's not good news. And we must be able to have, respect human rights. We must be able to have proper democratic governance. And in the absence of that, it's difficult. It would be extremely difficult to do anything. If you go on beating people up, why would you want to save the world? You would, first you would have to stop beating people up. To save anything, you can't be having this destructive idea. So I think you need to have democracy. You need to have freedoms for the environment work to go on.
Well, President Nasheed, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to give you, and where to either to the UN or elsewhere, an NRDC cap.
They might not let me in there.
But we thank you very much. We call ourselves the Earth's Best Defense, and we are delighted to have you such an extraordinary spokesperson for the effort to make people more aware of both the challenge and the solutions. So we hope you wear this and your team enjoys the hat and keep spreading the news. And we all look forward to seeing the movie.
Well, thank you very much, and it is always reassuring that you are there and you are concerned, and therefore we will always keep going. Thank you.
Thank you.